right, we're in Daniel chapter 2 today. Daniel chapter 2, and we talked last week about how that Daniel and his three friends got exiled over to Babylon as King Nebuchadnezzar came in and began to take over Jerusalem and Judah, and God's judgment was coming upon Judah because of their sin and different things there, and God allowed this to happen, that this secular pagan ruler of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, came in, and probably little known to him, was being God's vessel to bring judgment upon his people for their sin. And they had to go and be carried off to Babylon. And so now we're going to continue the story here as they're in Babylon, and God is using them in Babylon. We're on lesson number 9 in our Sunday school book called God Speaks Through Daniel. And it says right under that, God can speak through those wholly devoted to Him. And boy, I believe that. I really do, that God can speak through people today. I believe that God can still speak in dreams and visions. You know, it talks about in the last days that the old men would dream dreams, the young men would see visions. I believe God can still use that today. And it's always going to line up with the Bible, but He will use that today when He deems it appropriate. And we're talking today about this dream that God gave to King Nebuchadnezzar that was very disturbing to him, and he wanted to know the meaning of the dream. Now look at our lesson overview. It says, we hope this unit shows the book of Daniel to be a powerful, interconnected series of amazing accounts that reveal to us more about who God is, what He plans for this world, and why there is no greater joy than serving Him. Well, that's the truth. Daniel 2 then forms a foundation for the chapters that remain. God gave pagan King Nebuchadnezzar one of the most significant dreams in history. Boy, think about that sentence. One of the most significant dreams in history. Daniel's divinely inspired interpretation of that dream not only saved his and many other lives, but also painted a vital picture of God's plans for His people and for the world. Through Daniel 2, we are reminded that no human authority can approach the sovereign power and plan of God, the same God who cares deeply for His people. And I would say that sentence, or some of that sentence like this: no human authority is going to overcome God's sovereign power. No human authority is going to thwart God's sovereign plan. God is in control, and it's going to go the way that He wants it to go in this world. Now, Daniel 2 and 44 is our golden text, and this kind of enters in the middle of the story, but we'll talk about this later, Lord willing. This is just part of verse 44. It says, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall stand forever. Now, we'll talk about that some more here in a little bit, but let's go ahead and go to Daniel chapter 2 and enter in here where Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. All right, I'll just put this under here today. We got these graduation things up here getting ready for tonight. Going to be a good night tonight celebrating our graduates. All right, Daniel chapter 2, and let's go ahead and start in at verse 1. It says, and in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. So Babylon, of course, it's the southern kingdom of Israel, as we talked about last week, that they have taken captive. And they're over there, and Daniel and his three friends, as we studied last week, they were put to the test of whether they would compromise their convictions or not in the matter of the king's meat and the king's wine. And they requested, or Daniel requested, that they wouldn't have to be included in that they could eat the pulse, the vegetables, the things sown, and everything, maybe beans and wheat and stuff in with that, and water. And they passed the test with flying colors, as we talked about last week. And the Lord promoted Daniel and his three friends into that place of influence with King Nebuchadnezzar. And as we're going to see at the end of this chapter, they get promoted even more at the end of this. So God keeps using them here in this pagan society. And we're told here of this dream. In fact, it uses the plural here, that he dreamed dreams. And we don't know exactly how it was in his mind, but sometimes, later on it's going to use the singular, by the way, that he just says that he dreamed a dream, something to that effect. But sometimes when we dream, even today, it may just be with us, sometimes just some crazy old dream that we have in our mind, and sometimes we may dream a little bit, and then it's like we sleep a little bit, and then we dream a little more, and then we sleep a little more, and then we dream a little bit more of the dream. Sometimes we get this continuing story going on in our dreams, Maybe that's kind of what it was with him. Maybe it was kind of like he dreamed a lot of small dreams and then just thought of them as a whole unit. Another option is it's possible that he had this one dream, but dreamed it over and over. We don't really know exactly what happened in his mind, but it was such that it was troubling to him. Now, if you look in our Sunday school book points out that the Babylonians, as well as others, I guess it said, believed that dreams were messages sent from the gods, little g, gods. And so that makes sense that Nebuchadnezzar, being such a pagan type of a ruler, would want to know what this dream meant, because maybe he thought that one of the gods, little g, was talking to him. And they're probably tying some history in with that, but regardless, he was very troubled by these dreams. It says in verse 2, "Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to shew the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king." Now these are these folks that are just really dealing in wickedness, the things of sorcery and witchcraft and stuff. And they are advisors, it seems, to the king. These whole unit of people would make up what you might call a wise man board. And it seems to me that Nebuchadnezzar thinks of these guys as people that know how to get in contact with the gods. And a lot of these are doing a wicked way to do it, in the sorcery and witchcraft and stuff. But you got also Daniel and his three friends that are on this wise man board, if you will, that know how to get in contact with the one true God. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar realizes the difference necessarily as far as their contact with the gods, but I think he's lumping them all together as people that know how to get in contact with the supernatural to help him in the ruling of his kingdom. But Daniel and his three friends obviously are not dealing in witchcraft and things of that nature. They're dealing with the Lord himself, God. But he brings in these ones that are dealing in witchcraft. We're not told why Daniel and his three friends are not brought in at this time. That's just a detail we're not given. But God does it in his design that Daniel and his three friends are not there at the moment. Maybe just to get God more glory in the way that this happens. But these ones of wickedness came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, "I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans." It's kind of maybe a term that would include all of these ones, these astrologers and sorcerers and so forth. "Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will shew the interpretation." Well, that Syriac there, in my studying, I was looking at a commentary or maybe more than one about this. It's understood that this Syriac would have been the language that King Nebuchadnezzar usually spoke. And so they're speaking to him in this language. And in fact, it has something to do with Aramaic too. I don't know enough about it to say much about it. But there is a difference in the way it starts. The original text is written maybe in this Syriac here, starting at verse 4, going all the way through Daniel chapter 7 and verse 28. So I don't know why the change is in the original language, but this Syriac maybe seems to be used in a lot of the book of Daniel in the original language. But they approached the king, kind of maybe a standard greeting for that time. "O king, live forever." They're real respectful of those monarchs and everything. "Tell thy servants to dream, and we will shew the interpretation." Hey, that makes sense, don't it? Tell us the dream, and then we'll tell you what it means. Now, in their mind, they're bringing in some devilish type of incantation or something to get what the devil would say the interpretation is. Maybe they're just making stuff up. I mean, I don't really know what they're doing, but it's not of God, whatever they're doing. But they're just claiming they're going to be able to tell the interpretation if he'd tell them the dream. Well, verse 5, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. No pressure. No pressure, boys. Just tell me what I dreamed and tell me what it means, and you'll be safe. So basically, he's telling them they're going to die. Their house is going to be destroyed, not only if they can't tell the interpretation, but also if they can't tell what the dream was. Now, his claim here is that he had forgotten it. The thing is gone from me. And we don't really know how truthful he was in that. It seems to me, as you look at this passage and something that he says down in verse 9, seems to me that he's just testing them to see if he's going to get the right interpretation. Of course, he's just a pagan ruler. To lie is just as another thing to him probably. And he's just probably testing them to see, well, if they can tell me what my dream was, then I'll know that their interpretation is right. Because I know they're making contact, quote unquote. Well, they wasn't too happy about that. See, he went on in verse 6. But if ye shew the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore shew me the dream and the interpretation thereof. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will shew the interpretation of it. That ain't how it works, king. You got to tell us the dream, and then we'll tell you the interpretation. Verse 8, the king answered and said, I know of certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. In other words, I know that you're just trying to buy time. I knew I knew you would come in here and try to buy time on this. And maybe they were, because they didn't know what his dream would be. Weren't probably really as powerful as they claim to be in the supernatural, Now, I know the devil does have power in a wicked way. He's not greater than God. But these guys right here probably did not have as much contact as they claimed to have, perhaps. Verse 9, but if ye will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you, for ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. In other words, till things get better. You're just trying to get through here maybe. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know. See, that's where I think he's testing them. And I shall know that ye can shew me the interpretation thereof. I don't know that he's really forgotten it. I think he's just going on with them, acting like he has, so he can make sure this dream has been troubling enough to him that he wants to make sure that they're telling him the right interpretation. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can shew the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asks such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. King, you're just going overboard here. This is not reasonable what you're asking of us. Verse 11, and it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can shew it before the king except the gods, little g, whose dwelling is not with flesh. In other words, they're telling the king, you are just asking too much of us to tell the dream and the interpretation. Nobody, other kings on earth asked this. And in fact, the only person that could tell you that would be the gods themselves, it seems. Now, aren't they probably supposed to be in contact with those gods, supposedly? You would think, yeah. But anyways, they're resistant on this. Well, verse 12. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Now that's a problem, because Daniel and his 3 friends are a part of this wise man board. Now they're not dealing in witchcraft and sorcery, but they're a part of this wise man board. Because notice what happens in verse 13. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. This is a problem. Old Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as we know them, they're over there, they're trying to serve God, and they apparently are not even in the midst of this, because Daniel's going to seem like he don't even know what's going on. Why is the decree so hasty from the king? Says something like that here in a minute. And he has to be told what's going on. And so it's just what you might call, what we would say is it's an unfair thing, because they don't even know what's going on. So then verse 14, then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. So Daniel don't even know why all the wise men are getting killed. I mean, tell me what's going on here. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would shew the king the interpretation. Now here's where we see God's wisdom, and also we're going to see God's favor upon Daniel here. We've already seen in chapter 1 a wise response, a wise appeal from Daniel, as he knows how to deal with these type of monarchs like this. Apparently the Lord's just telling him what to do. And he goes in here, and he doesn't come in ready to fight. He doesn't come in and say, oh, king, this is just crazy. You are just a wicked king, and you ought to be put off your throne, and we're going to get something done about this. Doesn't come in like that. He comes in, and he just asks for time. Time for God to work, we might say. Would you just give us some time? That's a wise appeal right there. Just like he went in and was requesting that they didn't have to be involved with that food and drink last week that was going to be convicting to their conscience, was going to violate their conscience. He comes in with a wise appeal here and asks that the king would give him time. Now, there's probably a good chance that there was a risk that he could have been killed on the spot right there. He probably comes into the king uninvited. That would probably not have been a welcome thing to King Nebuchadnezzar. But the Lord gives him favor there that he is able to come in. And also the implication here is that King Nebuchadnezzar gave him time. Now it's interesting. One commentator, I think, pointed this out, something to this effect, that it's interesting how that King Nebuchadnezzar was getting mad at these old pagan wise men for trying to buy time. But then Daniel comes in requesting time, and he grants it to him. That's the favor of God. That's all it can be explained at, basically. Now, I know he comes in with it in a little better attitude, but really, ultimately, it's the favor of God upon Daniel, that the king would just grant him this time. We're not told the conversation where he granted it to him, but the implication is that he did. So, verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known. Now, this is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's in verse 17 here. That's their Hebrew names. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is their Babylonian names that King Nebuchadnezzar gave them, his companions. And this is what he talks to them about, that they would, well, he makes the thing known to them, but then he also says in verse 18 that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So he goes in there and asks his three friends basically to pray. Pray that God would show us mercy. Intercede to God on behalf of this situation. Well, God came through in the middle of the night. Boy, isn't that like the Lord? You think of Paul and Silas over there in that jail. And at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises to God. God came through. Boy, it don't have to be in the best of circumstances for God to come through. He can come through in the middle of the night. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Boy, God had showed him not only what the interpretation was, God showed Daniel what the dream was, because he's going to be able to repeat it back to Nebuchadnezzar. He praised or blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He just kind of has camp meeting here, probably in the middle of the night. For wisdom and might are his, and he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. Hey, he is declaring what God is about. He's in control of the times and the seasons, maybe talking about it all together as a whole, or maybe specifically talking about the times and seasons of the empires that we're about to talk about here in this dream. But also notice that line in there. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. Isn't that good to know? Isn't that good to know? God's in control of this whole world. Every leader in this whole world, we say, well, my goodness, I'd do this different, I'd do that different, whatever. Sure we would. Sometimes we like the rulers that are put above us. Sometimes we don't care for them and what they do. But God's in control of it all. He sets them up. He takes them down too. And he can do what needs to be done. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee. For thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. Well, he just has revival there and praises the Lord for a little bit. The Lord has showed him the dream and the interpretation. That thing that was secret, that's what he's talking about there, is that the thing that they did not know, what the people of wickedness and sorcery did not know either. The dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, and then also the interpretation. That was in darkness, but light dwells with God. He knows what is even veiled in darkness, and he revealed it to Daniel. Now, we were told also back in chapter 1 chapter 1 in verse 17, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. See, that's an important phrase really for the whole book of Daniel pretty much, because most of it at least, because God had gifted Daniel to be able to understand these visions and understand these dreams. That was from the Lord that he was able to know these things. Now verse 24. Therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, Destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will shew unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Now Belteshazzar was his Babylonian name. Nebuchadnezzar had given him. Daniel was his Hebrew name. Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers shew unto the king. But notice this next line. Boy, this will preach. But there is a God in heaven. There is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Now notice he didn't come in there and say, those others couldn't do it, but now I'm here. Didn't come in like that. He didn't come in and say, oh, those other guys couldn't do it, but hey, I have the gift of interpreting dreams and visions. And he did. God had given it to him. But he wasn't boasting about that in any way. He gave glory to God. There is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar. Here was what it was. What shall be in the latter days. This dream was a prophetic dream. This dream was going to reveal what was going to happen in kingdoms of the world for a huge span of time, hundreds of years, and even into the latter days that are yet to come, I believe, as you look at this. The latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. Now he goes back to glorifying God here a minute. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have, more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, here he's going to tell the dream, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. Now, I got a picture I want to put on the screen, and this is going to kind of give us some visual, just be able to see it visually here as we look at the rest of this lesson. And of course, this is just a rendering of how it may have been. This statue that he sees, this is maybe kind of close to how it might have been. And you can just kind of see that as we go along here. So it was a great image, big old thing. And it says, this great image whose brightness was excellent. Seems to mean that its countenance was very remarkable. I mean, it's just kind of a gripping thing as you would see this statue in the dream. And the form thereof was terrible. In other words, it caused fear. It caused dread. I mean, this was a significant type of a dream, so much that he was just very troubled by this dream. Then it says, this image's head was of fine gold. So you can see that right there on the picture. The head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. So that's a little bit harder to see up there, but you can see that mixture there in the feet on this statue of the dream. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Now, I don't think that is depicted. I don't know, there's a little sparkle there. That may be depicting the stone there in that picture. But anyways, there was this stone cut without hands that smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Okay, so now that's the dream. Now we're going to go back through it. Daniel, the Lord's given Daniel what the dream was, and it was right. That's what the king had dreamed. And now he's going to give the interpretation from Almighty God what the meaning of this is. Okay, we'll just take these kind of more a verse at a time. Verse 37. Thou, O king, art a king of kings. This is talking about King Nebuchadnezzar over Babylon. For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power and strength and glory. Nebuchadnezzar was just an incredibly dominant and powerful king upon the earth. One commentator said the committal of power in fullest plenitude belongs to Nebuchadnezzar personally, as having made Babylon the mighty empire it was. In 23 years after him, the empire was ended. With him, its greatness is identified. Daniel 4:30. His successors have done nothing notable. Not that he actually ruled every part of the globe, but that God granted him illimitable dominion in whatever direction his ambition led him. Egypt, Nineveh, Arabia, Syria, Tyre, and its Phoenician colonies. Jeremiah 27:5-8. And I get the idea here that even though maybe Nebuchadnezzar wasn't like set up in all parts of the world dominating, he had so much power that he could pretty well do whatever he wanted to in any part of the world. He had the influence that he could come in, he could invade it at any time, he could take over, he could do what he wanted to. I mean, this was a powerful monarch that really had control over the whole earth. But notice where his power came from the God of heaven. For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. Okay, so that's the first empire, representing the Babylonian Empire, which was in power at this time. And after thee, now here's the next part. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. I'll go ahead and read the rest of the verse. Another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Okay, so this second kingdom here is represented in the silver arms there and the silver breast. And it talked about that back in verse 32, his breast and his arms of silver. This kingdom right here is understood to be talking about the Medo-Persian Empire. That would come up after the Babylonian Empire. In a couple weeks, we're going to be studying later in Daniel about old Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall. And that's where the Babylonian kingdom fell, was under Belshazzar. And God told Belshazzar there that he had numbered his kingdom and finished it. And it was that very night that Belshazzar was slain. And then Darius the Median took the kingdom. And that was kind of the beginning of that Medo-Persian Empire in a sense. And it's represented there in the silver breast and arms of the statue. Silver, talking about it being inferior here, silver, of course, is an inferior substance to gold. And so that represents that inferiority there. But one commentator said about this inferiority, refers to inferiority only in the capacity of wealth and grandness. Actually, this empire, the Medo-Persian, would defeat the Babylonian Empire, making it a part of its grand conquests. The two arms of the image represent the two nations, making the dual kingdom, the Medes and the Persians. The empire lasted from about 540 to 332 BC, a time period of a little over 200 years. Daniel served a little while under this power, dying about 6 years after its ascendancy. This power under Cyrus, you've heard of King Cyrus as well, made it possible for Israel to be restored to her land after the 70 years of captivity. After God's appointed time of judgment had come up in this captivity, and some of them went back to the land of Israel. But so that's the second kingdom right there. We understand that to be talking about the Medo-Persian Empire. Then last part of verse 39 was another kingdom, and another third kingdom of brass. And that's represented in the brass belly and the brass thighs. They've got it a little bit more presentable there in that picture, perhaps than what it was in the dream. But another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Now, this third kingdom came up after the Medo-Persian Empire. We understand this to be talking about the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great. As you look back in history, and the belly, the thighs of brass represent that. One commentator noted that the Grecian Empire was greater in territory than the other kingdoms. But also think about this. This is a wild thing about old Alexander the Great. I don't know a lot about history, but in my studying, I've gathered some things here for this. But Alexander the Great thought he had conquered the whole world, and he wept because there was not another one to conquer. You talk about a guy that was probably hungry for power, hungry for dominion, and being able to just take over whatever he could take over. Alexander the Great is represented in that brass belly and thighs right there, that Grecian kingdom as we understand it. Now verse 40, and the fourth kingdom. Isn't this amazing, by the way, that God is prophesying through Daniel what's going to happen, that we've seen played out in these last several hundred years and so forth. Verse 40, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, represented in those iron legs of the statue. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. In other words, this fourth kingdom would be very harsh, very brutal, and it's understood that this fourth kingdom would have been the Roman Empire. And same empire that was in power when Jesus was born at Bethlehem. Same empire that was in power when he gave his life upon the cross. And we see the brutal type of crucifixion that they carried out under the Roman Empire. One commentator said nothing could better characterize the Roman power than this. Everything was crushed before it. The nations which they conquered ceased to be kingdoms and were reduced to provinces, and as kingdoms they were blotted out from the list of nations. Rome was just an incredibly dominating type of empire. Caesar Augustus was one of the emperors, and I believe Nero would also have been an emperor later on. Did just terrible persecution of the Christians. Nero at around 60 AD, something like that. And 66 AD, I remember something that we saw some years ago that talked about 66 AD, but I'm not sure the time span of Nero. But Rome is understood to be represented in these legs of iron. Now, this is to where I believe we get to where we are in the world today. The Roman Empire has fell, and now at this time, there are a lot of people in the world, a lot of nations in the world that have a lot of power, but we don't quite see altogether the empires like they did back then, where most of the world is just dominated by one power. Now, that rings a bell in our minds, doesn't it? There is something coming up the road that is going to be what we might call a one world government. There's going to be another empire coming. And I believe we're in what you might call a partial pause in prophecy right now. It's not all paused. But as you look at Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, there's going to be still some of that to come, that we're kind of in a pause period right now in a sense. There's still prophecy being unfolded. But in this partial pause right here, what's going to click it back, the clock going again? The rapture of the church. The rapture of the church. If we're ready to go as Christians, I believe we're going to go in the rapture. And then the clock is going to start more fully ticking again. The tribulation will begin to happen. And in this end times context, there's going to be coming this empire that I believe is represented in those feet. Notice what it says here in verse 41. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. In other words, in this end time context of this let me say it like this, a 10-nation coalition that comes together that will eventually be headed up by the Antichrist. And it will be what you might call a revised Roman Empire. It's not going to be as strong as the Roman Empire was, because it's going to have that weakness about it. It's not all iron. It's part iron, part of clay. So there's going to be a weakness in their coalition, whether it's from some nations that maybe don't know how to war like the other ones do, or maybe don't have the same goals in some sense as the other nations do. But there's going to be some weakness in that where it's not as strong as the old Roman Empire. But this empire, they will come against Israel. This 10-nation coalition under the leadership of the Antichrist will come together against Israel in the tribulation period. And the bottom line is, we don't know all of who's going to be in that. Now, I think as you look at Bible prophecy, I'm just going to tell you, I think Russia will probably be involved. I think Iran will probably be involved in that. And I don't know if they're really going to be able to wipe them out, because I think they're going to be present in the end times. In the end times. Persia is talked about in Ezekiel chapter 38. So I wouldn't be surprised, this is just opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if China is involved. Ezekiel 38 also mentions Ethiopia and Libya. Hey, I'm trying to stay biblical. China is the only one that's not maybe is specifically mentioned in Bible prophecy, but I'm trying to stay biblical here. Not political, but biblical. But this 10-nation alliance, whoever it is, it's not a political thing. It's a spiritual thing that's going to happen. It's a spiritual thing. It's going to be darkness coming against light. And they will come against Jesus Christ, in a sense, coming against Israel in the battle of Armageddon. It's where it's all going to climax there in the end times. But then, notice what happens in verse 44. And in the days of these kings, so in other words, when this 10-nation coalition is going about under the leadership of the Antichrist, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. Hallelujah. And it shall stand forever. It shall stand forever. Not going to be falling, rising, falling, rising. God's kingdom, when he sets it up on this earth, he's going to stand forever. Now notice what it said back in verse number 34. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and break them to pieces. So it comes against that 10-nation coalition at the Battle of Armageddon, and it just breaks it apart. He comes and he doesn't take sides, he takes over. And it says, now back in verse 45, for as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. And remember what it said back in part of verse 35. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. That's what the kingdom of God's going to do. Habakkuk 2:14 says, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. He's coming back. He's coming back. And he's going to take over this world. And he's going to rule and reign with righteousness. We just need to be ready to meet him. Ready to go. Ready to meet him. So this was the dream, and this was the interpretation thereof. And it was sure and certain. Verse 46, then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel. Well, Daniel wouldn't have liked that. It wasn't Daniel that did it. It was God. And commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts. Now notice this, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. And then verse 49 talks about his three friends getting promoted too. Now, you can go ahead and open the door, but let me just say this real quick. In Jeremiah 29, they were told to seek the peace of the city. Maybe they were praying for the peace of the city in that. And wouldn't it be something, I believe this is the way, if the timing works out that they prayed it and then this happened, God would have been answering their prayers to set a man like Daniel, I think, the number 2 man in all of Babylon. How about that? God knows how to take care of his people, don't he? Amen. He's going to do the same for us. Well, God bless you. We'll take a break and we'll start service in just a few minutes. Next week, we'll talk about the fiery furnace, old Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God bless you.